Welcome to the latest edition of the Omni Talk Retail Ask an Expert series. I'm your host, Chris Walton.
And I'm Mezzenga.
And we are the founders of Omni Talk, the fast-growing retail media outlet that is all about the companies, the technologies, and the people that are coming together to shape the future of retail. Or as we like to say, the media organization that focuses on retail's tomorrow, today. Today, we have brought aboard two experts to share with us how the cleverest retailers out there are utilizing RFID to its fullest potential. So please join us in welcoming Marshall Kay, the Global Director of Retail Transformation Services at Avery Dennison, and Randy Dunn, the Director of Customer Success at Zebra Technologies. Gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us. I'm looking forward to our discussion today.
We are too, Randy.
Yeah, this is going to be great.
Well, you guys, before we get into the discussion with both of you, I just want to give a quick reminder to those who are joining us live on LinkedIn right now for this playback. So if you have any questions for the team on RFID, any of the things we're discussing today, please put them into the chat on the right side of your screen. We'll try our best to answer all of those questions live as we go through the conversation. Now, Marshall, I want to start by asking you a question before we can dive into how the cleverest retailers are using RFID. Let's kind of outline the RFID timeline, because I think it's really important. There's still a lot of people who may have explored RFID 6-7 years ago and haven't since. So explain for us a little bit about some things that have developed in terms of RFID that might surprise the audience, if you would.
That's a great question, Anne. And I think there are many things that would surprise people. I start by telling people that we basically have labels for any type of consumer product you can imagine. That in the past you used to hear, well, if something is made with liquid, then RFID won't work. Or if something had metal packaging or a lot of metal content, like a frying pan, for example, that, oh, you could never use RFID. Well, I have news for you. We have labels for frying pans and things.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, we have labels of all shapes and sizes too. And so we've kind of gotten to a point in retail where if you're a retailer, if you sell it, we can tag it. That's kind of where we are. The other thing that really surprises people is the ultra low price points of the merchandise now is getting RFID labels. We're seeing lots of stuff that sells for less than $5. Stuff that sells for less than $4, $3. You know, once in a while, you'll stumble upon something that sells for even 99 cents. And that is very different from what some people used to think, and some people still may think about RFID. And then in terms of the timeline and the history, I think one thing to point out, Anne, is that many people thought that RFID would start with the retailers who sold at the most expensive price points. So they assumed, oh, this will start with Neiman Marcus and work its way up to Nordstrom and Macy's and Target and one day Walmart. And what we saw in the industry over the last 10 years, and we kind of knew it was going to happen, was that this started at the Walmart, Target to Macy's level, and then basically expanded from a volume perspective and then migrated upwards in terms of the price point in the food chain. And then the final thing I'll mention, only because I still hear this question sometimes, or I hear the statement, and it boggles my mind that people still think this, is that all sorts of stuff gets source tagged by global branded manufacturers and brands each and every year. People sometimes say that, well, okay, it's all well and good for someone like Uniqlo or Zara to do this, but once you need to get branded vendors on board, that's going to take a long time too. Well, that's been happening for over a decade. So that's old news.
Wow. That was a great opening, Marshall. That was really good. Yeah, I love the point about mass being the first place to adopt this too, because I imagine that's highly correlated with the level of inventory accuracy in a mass retail environment too, because of the amount of traffic you have going through the store. It necessitates that you look at these types of deployments. All right, Randy. So let's go to you next. So retailers who use a RFID in their stores, they tend to get a large set of capabilities that their competitors also lack. So can you tell us about what some of those are to, maybe extend Marshall's argument a little bit further?
Yeah, sure. No. And so, it's not, we're not missed on point that we're on an Omni Talk retail podcast here, right? Omnichannel and the ability to use the stores to service both the inbound shopper and the digital shopper was really the origin and the reason that RFID has taken off, right? Knowing what you have and where it's at in the store is an imperative to run a precise omni-channel operation. So there were some studies done a number of years ago that said, your system of record and your true reality distort at a rate of about 3% a month. And so when you close your books during January and you're trying to get ready for your holiday season, what you think you have and what you really have could be as much as 35 percentage points different. And so
Jesus.
in order to really maximize the ability to leverage the inventory in stores, RFID at the item level started in apparel, which is kind of a complex SKU category, but as Marcia said, it's gone a number of places for accurate inventory information at the store level that gives you a system of reality that can be married to your system of record. That is the number one value proposition by far. But once you get tags on stuff, a whole bunch of other really interesting things can happen. And so, thinking about the supply chain, right? Nobody wants to sacrifice speed in their supply chains, but accuracy is worthwhile too. And so using non-line of sight, long range RFID to be able to document and audit what's coming to your supply chain, being able to confirm what's been delivered or received, that's another place that retailers are seeing an awful lot of value. I think we'll talk a little bit about a specialty use case here around, where is this going in a world where shrink seems to be getting out of control? So I think those are all areas that we can continue to explore today.
Yeah, Randy, I teased something in the beginning too, or I teased something in the promotion of this event too. You talked to me in previous sessions where we've met each other about a ladder approach, and that's kind of what you're espousing here, right? That there's a ladder of value that comes from the implementation here. Is that right?
Well, yeah, we absolutely agree that, there are things that are naturally easier and more important to do in order to get an ROI payback with RFID. And so starting with tagging, using mobile scanners for data capture, being able to leverage that data in your backend systems, easy first step, good solid recipe for that. And that's where almost all retailers start. As you now start to think about, I've got tags on my inventory. I've got this amazing capability to automatically read these, inventory items. What do I want to do with that? Do I want to understand what's coming in the back of the store? Do I want to understand what's going out the front of the store? Do I want to be able to figure out, what's the bundle or basket of items going in and out of my fitting rooms, right? There's all these other kinds of capabilities that build on top of once you get inventory right, then go into the next layer of problems and beginning to get more sophisticated with your data capture and more sophisticated with how you use that data.
Yeah, I don't know what you said there too, Randy. I don't know if you said this intentionally or if I even heard it, but you said automagically, which is just a great word, which I'm going to start using a lot. Right. So Marshall, you want to jump in here? Go ahead.
Yeah, so there are kind of three legs of the stool when it comes to store inventory excellence. One is inventory accuracy, which Randy discussed at length. The other is inventory visibility, and the other is inventory findability. So having the right data on the right system and have that match with your system of record and have one version of the truth that's actually the truth is really big. But in terms of also helping employees find product within the four walls of the store in the course of day-to-day restocking of the floor and in the course of finding stuff quickly for omni fulfillment, whether that's ship from store or BOPIS, that's a big deal. And then, of course, the visibility isn't just in the moment. It's also providing your systems information they've never had before, that systems have never had before, in terms of what's been sitting on the sales floor, what's been sitting in the stockroom. You might think that something just isn't selling well in a store because the local market doesn't seem to like it. But in reality, it might not have been out on the floor or
Mhm.
been out on the floor and kept on the floor for nearly as long as you assumed it was. And then
Well,
there's another thing too.
yeah.
So
No, go for it, Marshall.
I'll continue the riff. Apart from the three legs of the stool, accuracy, visibility, findability, there are other benefits too, like speeding up checkout. Not just for self-checkout, like Uniqlo, for example, where you just drop items in the basket at checkout and it rings up automatically, but also for regular assisted checkout.
Yeah, assisted checkout, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just making sure all those items get scanned, like in a Lululemon example or something like that too. Well, Marshall, you touched on it a little bit, but I want to understand, with all of this information, those three legs of the stool that are being piped into retailers, and with a focus more now on data science and AI, we have some C-suite executives listening, and certainly their teams. What can they do then to ensure the accuracy and the quality of that inventory data is getting piped in correctly to those optimization engines and to the rest of their systems internally?
I want to go back to something Randy said, because Randy shone the spotlight on the fact that the discrepancy between what a retailer thinks it has in terms of the unit quantity of a SKU in a store and what it actually has, that gap can be really, really big. And there are a couple different ways of looking at it. One way is what you'd call exact match. So for every 100 SKUs, how many of those 100 did your system of record match exactly what the unit quantity of that SKU was in the store? So exact match is interesting, but it only tells part of the story, because when something doesn't match, it also doesn't tell you about the extent of the discrepancy. So you need to look at both of those things in concert. And there's another metric. It's called SMAPE. It's SMAPE. I didn't
Thanks
create.
for
Sounds like a
spelling that
Harry
out.
Potter. Sounds like we just walked into a Harry Potter novel, Marshall.
It does. But basically, what SMAPE does is it looks at both of these things in concert. So it looks at the extent of the deviation. So if I expect to have 20 units of a SKU and I only have 18 units, I'm off by 2 out of 20, 10%. No big deal. I mean, obviously you want it closer, but arguably it's not the end of the world. But if I'm expecting 5 units of a SKU and I only have 3, I'm off by 40%. That's a really, really big deal. So so I would suggest to executives, take a real good hard look at the extent of your deficiencies, because your inventory accuracy isn't nearly as good as you might think that it is. And then start looking at the extent to which RFID fixes that big problem for you. Because as you mentioned earlier, Chris, it's great to have data science, but, or maybe it was you, Ann, it's great to have data science, but ultimately it's only as good as the data that it's working with.
Yeah, and what you can do with it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Randy, I want to touch on this a little bit too, because you brought it up very quickly, but that's the issue of shoplifting, theft, organized crime, basically all the things related to AP, which can happen from the shopper. It can be caused from the employees as well. So, how are the use cases involving RFID evolving to actually prevent theft from even occurring, as opposed to just being able to detect it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I've had the privilege of sitting on the board of advisors at the Loss Prevention Research Council down in Gainesville, Florida for a number of years. And in the last 5 years, right, global or shrink in the US has gone from 60 billion to $120 billion problem, right? And
Double.
you see it, right? Every time there's quarterly earnings, some poor CEO or CFO is trying to explain away that they didn't hit their number because they lost way more than they even had any idea about. And so, traditionally loss prevention tools have been about friction, right? Let me make it hard to take this. Let me make it, right? Think about clamshells, hard to get the item out of the packaging, lockup cages or spider wraps. What that does, though, is that actually interferes with the shopping process of a person that you're trying to get in the store. She doesn't like that level of inconvenience. And so there's this tension between the operators and merchants on how do you open up the store and make it as convenient as possible, and how do you, still protect your goods. So one of the things that has also been a glaring hole in the asset protection world is there's no data about it, right? Though that's 60 billion and 120 billion that we talked about.
Yeah, right.
That's right. I think that's right. And so the whole idea of being able to measure in a place where people are actively trying to circumvent your controls, right? That there people are trying not to be detected. And so using RFID as a loss detection capability, it's not the next generation of loss prevention, right? It's not going to be the thing that stops people dead in their tracks. What it is going to be is the beginning of building a systematic set of analytics that allow you to understand, hot hours or hot items or peak events, or, being able to watch these crews work their way down I-95. And so it's about getting more predictive and more anticipatory. And I analogize this to something that everybody's going to get, right? Before the barcode was read in the store, right? Retailers didn't know what to reorder. They didn't have the ability to run these mega operations. It was about the data that they were able to capture, analyze, leverage, share, and all those things. That is the story in loss detection. I think the other thing that's fascinating, right? You can't get Walmart or Target, apologize, Walmart and Target, to agree on anything except in this asset protection space, right? They've got a common interest, and that is we want bad actors out of our stores. And so the ability to collaborate and now, use data to create industry size models for how do we actually alert and detect and prevent and, all those things, right? You go back to the same old toolbox, but now it's a dynamic toolbox with information. And I think that's a game changer for asset protection.
Right. I love the analogy too of the barcodes. And also, I mean, basically what you're saying is you can't prevent what you don't know that you're trying to stop, right?
You can't manage what you don't measure.
Yeah, you can't manage what you don't measure. That's a great way to put it.
So if I can add something really quickly, Dr. Reed Hayes, who heads up the Loss Prevention Research Council, a very, very well-known criminologist, has basically said that RFID is a game changer for loss prevention, that when it is used in combination with other technologies and other measures like security guards and other defensive measures, that this is going to change the game. It's that combination of things. And at the heart of it is serialization, because with a smart label, an RFID label, a product has a unique serialized digital ID, like a license plate, and that serialization is really key. It's also helping to create great evidence for law enforcement and prosecutors. So to an extent, it's allowing retailers to fight back a bit because, hey, theft is a societal issue, but also that serialization is really key, the item serial number, in terms of understanding who was ripping you off, when and how, who may be involved in trying to return stolen merchandise. Quite apart from who's trying to return it, also it gives you the ability to not give a refund or credit on something that was never purchased.
Wow, Randy? This topic's getting spicy. Randy, you want to jump in again? Go for it.
Yeah, I think there's one other element to this, and that is, no retailer that I'm aware of has a policy of, I want you to interact with people doing bad things, right? Everybody's got a policy. I even read a story where some folks lost their jobs at a particular company because they didn't follow that policy. So it's good guys with guns that make a difference. But when you invite them into your store with a call that says, hey, we just had 3 bad guys in here, what'd they take? We're not sure. Where'd they go? Don't really know. And we'll go review a bunch of video and then we'll come back to you with a case, as opposed to at 326 out of exit 2, there were 3 men that took $7,022 worth of stuff. Here are the 14 items that is, and we saw them heading out the parking lot going south. That's a very different kind of interaction. with law enforcement, they got to win too, and they don't want to work lousy cases. And so this ability to document what is going out the door really, really helps our, our law officers.
The industry in general. Great point.
And Marshall, I just have to ask one more question, because you were talking about the types of tags that can go on items now too. One question that I've heard from retailers too is like, well, is RFID tagging enough? Like, can they just rip the tags off? Are you seeing like more people work to like embed RFID tags in garments or in other products? Or is that something that's being done here too to help with the things that Randy's talking about?
That's a great question, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because more and more has been done in recent years to secure the connection between the product and its smart label and its unique digital ID, whether that's with stickers that have great adhesive and other ways to make it difficult to remove the sticker from the item, even if you were trying to remove that sticker, or in the case of fabric labels or other integrated labels as well. So while it is true that not every product that passes through a smart exit will still have its RFID label connected, you'd be amazed at the large percentage of items that do. And I will also tell you too, that even if a label were removed prior to the thief, which might even be a dishonest employee, before they left the premises, that label is already doing its job. And I'll tell you why.
True. Yeah.
Because think of inventory counting, rapid inventory counting that RFID allows is kind of like students in school and the teacher taking attendance. And when you the retailer know that that piece of merchandise and you have its serial number is no longer in the building, and you had assumed it was in the building, that tag is delivering value too. But as we noted, smart exits are a huge win, and the value extends not just in the store itself. It delivers value when people try to return stolen merchandise. It delivers value to investigators and law enforcement and prosecutors when items are found in places they're not supposed to be. So, for example, you might have a nail salon that does brisk business selling merchandise that was obtained by questionable means. Or I'll give you another example. Law enforcement is working really hard to partner with retailers on this issue of retail theft, but they have limited time and bandwidth and resources to do that. One of the things that consumes some of that time is when they find stolen merchandise, let's say in a warehouse, and they don't know which retailer it belongs to. That's a waste of their time too. So Joe Cole, the head of asset protection at Macy's, speaking at the NRF show in January as part of a session that we at Avery Dennison did, talked about the fact that in the past, it used to be a race to get to the warehouse first, that whichever retailer got there would be able to take the stolen Levi's jeans or perhaps Nike product that was recovered by the police. And now, because of the serialized product ID and the ability to demonstrate that, yes, it belonged to Macy's, he doesn't need to worry about that anymore. So it might seem like a small thing, but all of these little things fit together in this puzzle as retailers working with law enforcement and prosecutors are trying to turn the tide and make it harder and harder for people to act dishonestly, or to, let's say, increase the disincentive to do what people know they ought not to be doing in the first place.
Yeah, Marshall, I think that's a great way to tie this in a bow. And before we go on to the next path, maybe if you wouldn't mind, like, we obviously have mentioned several cases here where RFID makes it easy to do omnichannel well. Let's just, if you can, like, kind of summarize this before we move into the next like phase of the conversation, talking about like specific roles and how people can take action with RFID.
So if I can add one or two things on the Omni front, when you think of all the inventory sitting in a store, that has the potential to be a magnet for customers who are looking online to see if the thing that they're looking for on their phone or perhaps in front of their computer is actually in store. Now, many retailers, because they don't have confidence in their inventory data, they use a buffer. So essentially, it's a business rule that says, unless the system tells me that I've got at least 4 of this item or 5 of this item, for example, I'm going to act as if I only have 1, or I'm going to act as if I have none. So as a result, all of that inventory that has the potential to be a really strong magnet ends up being a far weaker magnet than it needs to be. And similarly, that inventory is hidden from the retailer's own fulfillment systems. And with omni-channel fulfillment and the impact on profitability, anytime you're not making optimal decisions, or anytime that you send an order to one store, but it ends up being fulfilled by 2 stores, your profitability on that order and that transaction can go upside down. So basically, inventory accuracy and that visibility and findability, the 3 legs of the stool, contribute towards better BOPIS and also better fulfillment. And even when orders aren't placed and it's customers just looking to see whether they should make that trip to the store, this helps take full advantage of the inventory spread out across your fleet of stores.
Right. Well, let's take this into another direction now. Randy, with everything that Marshall just summarized for us, whose job in a retailer, in the C-suite, whose job is it to ensure that RFID is being used and used correctly to the cases that you and Marshall just outlined?
Yeah, it's a really important question. One I think I've got a point of view on that might catch you off guard. So let me try to walk this. Let me walk this dog. So, IT absolutely has to be part of it.
Okay.
IT might even own the project. IT doesn't own the problems, right? So RFID is about solving business problems. And so if that's problem is, how do the stores better operate and utilize their labor? Not surprising that a store operator might be in charge.
Right.
Another retailer might have this point of view that, I've got so much inventory and I'm trying to work as a merchant to keep that stuff flowing. Maybe a merchant wants that visibility and findability. I've even seen a couple where the asset protectors or the supply chain folks. What I would tell you is, it's going to be business problem centric, but it's going to be a change agent that believes in capability building, not quarter over quarter pain problem resolution. Like, in order to make quantum leaps as a retailer and go to the next level, you almost always have to engage in some kind of capability building. And so the change agents that can see that, the change agents that understand the business, the change agents that can see either how their competitors are catching them or how they can catch their competitors, those are the people that almost always lead these big programs.
Yeah. But there, like, to your point, there's benefits to every single part of the organization.
It's the beauty of RFID, right? It's the gift that gives something to everybody.
Right.
And if I could add to that really quickly, I think it's important to always remember what type of retailer you're speaking about. Are you speaking about a mass merchant? Are you speaking about a supermarket? Are you speaking about a drugstore? It's also important to remember what year you're talking about too. So for example, if we're talking about a clothing retailer, a specialty apparel brand, we're in the year 2024. Many of your peers have been using this for almost a decade, in some cases over a decade.
Right.
Just who in the C-suite is it not the responsibility of for your company to be using RFID right now? But having said that, and I realize that maybe it's a little edgy to have said what I said, but what I'll say is, if I'm talking about an apparel retailer, the CTO, the head of asset protection, the chief merchant, and the CFO who ought to be saying, hey, why aren't we doing RFID? The CEO and CFO saying, why haven't you come asking for money for RFID, asking that question of the head of asset protection and the head of store operations. It's really a variety of different people, but it's a collective responsibility of the C-suite, because the gap between the C-suites that understood the significance of RFID, that it was going to be a need to have, not a nice to have, and the C-suites who still haven't started, that gap is surprisingly large. And ideally, in other sectors that have the ability to already be using RFID, like drugstores, for example, or supermarkets, the learning curve for them isn't nearly as long.
All right, so so I love that you brought that up, Marshall. Let's get a little improvisational here at the end to keep people interested in this webinar as it's coming through to them live. So I want to put your feet to the fire on what you just said a little bit, both of you. So Randy, let's actually go to you first. So I'm curious, as Marshall alluded to the verticals. So if you were talking to a CEO of a supermarket, let's say a supermarket chain that hasn't yet begun using RFID, and I'm going to go through the verticals on this one too, because I think it'll be fun. We'll see where it goes. What would you tell them, Randy?
Yeah, no, I would say, not a lot of RFID tagging in the supermarket industry, but a lot of common problems where freshness and what I would call first expire, first out creates a lot of waste. And so, RFID is a perfect technology for being able to manage those first expired, first out kinds of waste producing situations. I think the other thing that I also want to be mindful of is RFID can have a lot of value when it's tagged at the case level, and you don't have to tag. Nobody's expecting people to start tagging heads of lettuce. And so how do you leverage, the packaging that things come in to be able to use RFID for traceability and the things that every supermarket CEO knows are problems that could bite them if they don't understand what they got and where it came from.
Got it. Okay. All right, Marshall, back to you now. So same question, but for the drugstore industry, if you're a drugstore chain that hasn't utilized RFID, what would you tell them, Marshall?
I would say that you can already be using RFID for asset protection, that you're already investing a lot of time and money into an older technology that isn't serialized, and you already could be protecting product and using RFID to solve who's ripping you off, how they're ripping you off, etc., and helping you get more bang for the buck out of the money that you're devoting to the use of security guards that you can and still should be using. But basically, I'd tell the CEO, you ought to be speaking to the head of asset protection. You should sit down with the chief merchant and the head of store operations. So I'll give you an example. I had a meeting with the head of asset protection from a drugstore chain within the past 3 weeks. And they mentioned that they are starting to remove or they're starting to de-emphasize the use of the older sensor tags, the labels that aren't serialized. And where right now they're asking their store to spend time and money putting on these labels because they're not getting the bang for the buck.
Right. What's the point of them if they're not doing anything, right?
And here's the key thing. I ought to have mentioned it earlier. Drugstores right now are locking up all sorts of merchandise. Their trading partners, the brands, obviously hate that. Consumers hate that. Store employees hate that. Everybody hates that. Once you transition to working with smart labels, it unlocks a bunch of opportunities. So that's what I'd say.
Awesome. All right. So let's keep these I got two more. Let's keep it kind of rapid fire here. Two more off the top of my head. So Randy, if you're a consumer electronics retailer, how should they be thinking about starting with RFID? What consideration should they give to it?
Yeah, so I'm not a consumer electronics CEO, but my guess is they have the most sophisticated omni-channel shoppers on the planet. Because they're all techies. They're all techies. And so how do I leverage my store footprint as a node in my supply chain or a showcase in my communities where, these really sophisticated omni-channel shoppers can now have confidence that I can see it at my local consumer electronics store. If I need it today, I can go online and figure out where I need to go to get it. And if I want, as a retailer, want to minimize the shipping costs of what I've got to deliver, or ideally get them to come pick up and do the shopping for them, that is a no-brainer. But it is because a consumer electronics CEO is sitting on top of the most sophisticated omni-channel shoppers.
It's a great point. Wow. All right, last one, Marshall. Let's do specialty apparel. You talked about it a little bit before. We've seen good traction in that industry in regards to the use of RFID. But if there is a CEO out there, let's say, potentially living under a rock, I'm not ashamed to say it, who hasn't yet deployed RFID, what would you tell them?
I would say that there is no single thing you can do to improve the fortunes of your company than authorize the source tagging of your merchandise. Full stop.
Full stop. Well said. Well said. All right. Any other closing thoughts from either one of you before we let you go?
I think it's good to think of RFID as kind of like a three-sport varsity athlete. It does lots of different things. So we talked about loss prevention, for example, and loss detection. RFID, I wouldn't call it primarily a loss prevention technology, but even with that being the case, it's about to change the game for that whole world of loss prevention. It is immensely valuable to that community and constituency and to retailers more generally. So I think you should think of it as something that does a lot of different things and makes contributions in a bunch of different ways. And then the other thing I'd say is that it's important for people to be talking about it more. My observation, I've been going to the RF show for over 20 years, or almost 20 years. I've been going to Shop Talk. I recently went to World Retail Congress. I think there's a general sense amongst the retail industry's intelligentsia, and I say that respectfully, that RFID is around. RFID is likely a good thing to do. It's not simple from the outside looking in to see which retailers are or aren't using it.
Right.
But there needs to be more conversation about why this is important. It's all well and good for Marshall and Randy and Avery Dennison and Zebra to share with you what we know to be true about RFID. But what's far more important is what you, Chris, and you, Ann, know to be true about RFID, and other people whose opinions really, really count a lot in the world of retail to be ushering in this era of smarter retail.
Thank you both. I mean, we titled this session how the cleverest retailers are using RFID. And I think you both gave us tremendous insights to how the best of the best are deploying it and how they're thinking about it now and into the future, kind of with the latter approach that Randy alluded to, even potentially introducing the idea of like RFID plus. Those pluses get thrown around with everything, don't they, Randy? And so like you can really plus up your business by just getting into RFID to begin with. There's so many value offshoots that come from it. And you guys did a great job outlining that for our audience.
I like RFID. Everybody's all American. Marshall, I'm going to use that. My three-sport varsity athlete. I like it.
Well, let's see how well that plays in Europe, Randy.
I'm going to go try to find my old letter jacket. That was awesome.
Awesome. All right. So if people watching, listening later want to get in touch with either one of you, what's the best way for them to do that? Marshall, why don't you go first?
Sure. I'd suggest either via LinkedIn, or my email address is marshall.kay@averydennison.com. And Marshall is spelled with 2 L's.
Randy?
Yeah, Randall with 1 L, RANDAL.Dunn @zebra.com.
And is Dunn DUNN?
DUNN. Yeah, sorry.
Awesome. No worries. No worries. That's why we're here.
That wraps us up. Thank you so much to Marshall Kay and Randy Dunn for sitting down with us today. Thanks to all of you who joined us live on LinkedIn. And as always, on behalf of all of us here at Omni Talk, be careful out there.